Okay. One Piece chapter 1103, which god dog, man, like I never thought One Piece would go this long. Like it's not as easy as like chapter 101, 102. Like when we start getting into four digits, like I have to catch myself. But following up off of the last chapter, this is so interesting, just given the fact that we have basically transitioned from one emotional high to another emotional high. And this is great payoff because Oda is keeping his foot on the gas, even though, like, when you look at it, you would argue and say, especially if you're reading this week to week, you would argue, like, oh my God, nothing really happened. But I have the benefit of like binge reading, right? And for me to be able to see this and to see how everything's flowing, one emotional connection after the other, I really feel like this is the perfect follow up chapter where after we had Bonney breaking down into tears at the end of the last chapter, to open up and to have Vegapunk asking her, did you see everything? And Bonney, she's in her adult form and she's saying, I did. And as soon as Vegapunk says, I broke my promise to your father, to see Bonnie shrink down, I had to do a double take because she's back down to her current size, what she should be as a 10-year-old kid. And to see her hugging Vegapunk in this way and to basically be sobbing to the point where like her words, they aren't even correctly spelled out. It's I and not I. And that's something that you would think is consistent with how a little kid looks. Like I like the decision here just because of the vulnerability it shows with Bonnie here. Because when you see her, and I said this in the last chapter, when you see her, like it's so easy to forget that she's technically 10 years old, but she looks like an adult. And so when you look at her interactions, you rightfully start framing her like an adult. But the decision to have her switch back to childhood like this and showcase her vulnerability in this way, it was a really good narrative decision here. Now, the other thing I like about this is as you show more of the vulnerability, it allows us to see more of what you see out of Vegapunk's character because he tells Bonnie, like, I have a gift from your father. It's a sunflower shaped sapphire necklace. And what I like about this is that because it's shaped like the sun, that's a connection back to Nika, the sun god. And so I like how with a gift like that, it just shows like Kuma did think of something that would be fitting for his daughter, but also the way that that necklace is basically used as an anchor here. And what I mean by this is Oda uses that as a way to hold Bonnie and Kuma together and also take the opportunity to put us in a position where we can transition over to Luffy. And it's as Saturn says later on in the chapter, Bonnie has not put it together that Luffy is Nika the sun god that Kuma was looking for. And so her having that necklace and that necklace being something that binds her to her father and then have something else in the form of Luffy being the very person that they were searching for, the person that would lead them to freedom. I like all these different layers that Oda's doing here. Like this is one of those times where, again, like there was some action, but this is a chapter where you don't really need it. And for a shonen, and I know One Piece isn't a battle shonen, but typically when you get to shonen and everything, when you don't have a lot of action, it can be very easy for people to tune out. And I feel like where One Piece really differs is you get so vested in the characters and the backstories and the world building and the adventure element that the fights are basically an extra. It's very similar to what Toriyama used to do at Dragon Ball, where there was adventure in Dragon Ball, there was gag humor, and then you just happen to have a lot of cool fights. Now that eventually shifted once you got over to the Z portion, but where I think that Oda really surpassed his mentor in Toriyama is even as we've gotten into the new world and deeper into the new world, at its heart, One Piece has grown, but it has not strayed away from the thing that made it so great. And it's chapters like this that really accomplish that. And what I like here is that as Vegapunk is apologizing and saying everything that's happened has been his fault, it's setting the stage for a reveal that we're going to get later on in the chapter where we learn that really Saturn was the one that was behind everything in more ways than we ever would have thought about. But when Vegapunk's talking, he's like, man, you know, while you're in this room, going through all these different memories. A lot of stuff has happened on Egghead. The Straw Hats, they saved my life. Bonney finds out that Luffy is the son of Dragon. Dragon and Kuma were close friends. And so when Vegapunk is talking, he says, like, man, it is a strange twist of fate that Dragon's son and Kuma's daughter would both be here. And we then transition over to where we see Bonney and she's getting choked out by Saturn. And Saturn's just rubbing it in her face, saying, your father, he's dead. You see the Marines, you see the Straw Hats, they can't move. Luffy's begging for food. And then as you see Sentomaru and the others captured, you see Kizaru. And that's the first time where when I see Kizaru, I'm thinking, okay, he's up to something. And we don't see in this chapter where this is going, but kind of feel like Kizaru is going to be a Chekhov's gun. Basically, the way that he's looking at Bonney and surveying the situation, I think there's going to be something else coming here. I don't think that he's going to be 100% in league with what Saturn's doing. Now, on the other side of this, we get more reactions where we see people and they're reading the World Economic News stuff, and it's like, oh my God, the brand new Emperor of the Sea, he's holed up on Egghead, somebody's going to die. But Dragon, on the other hand, Dragon takes this information and he's already thinking a few steps ahead. And he's like, okay, so if he has got some of his instincts back, where would he go? And Ivankov is like, well, if it was me, I would just go straight to where the Celestial Dragons are. I just go right there. I wouldn't think twice about it. But Kuma, he would go somewhere else different. And it's not said here, but we as the audience know, okay, like Kuma has gone for his daughter. And I love that right there. And it says a lot about parental instincts, because Kuma doesn't have to be told that his daughter's in danger. He's just automatically going there. And it's so fitting that when he was basically living out his last few years as a functioning human, he was keeping distance from his daughter. And he was saying, like, man, I wish you wouldn't become a pirate and etc. And now that he's basically had his humanity, quote unquote, turned off and he's made into a full-blown cyborg, I like the fact that what you're seeing is that he is still acting first and foremost like a father, doing it subconsciously, following his instincts. And he's going towards his daughter because it's that parental instinct where your child's in danger. So I like seeing that. And I like how when Bonney is faced with Saturn, that killer instinct in her, it is still there. And she tries to basically use the Nika-like future. And, like her body's, change shape and everything. Very similar to what you see with Luffy. And this is where Saturn just starts doing some nasty work, because as soon as he sees, and he freaks out for a second, he's like, wait a second, what's going on here? But when Bonnie's body's not able to hold together, this is where the nasty work comes in. He starts squeezing her even tighter. And he says, like, it makes sense that you would know that name because you are Kuma's daughter. And when he first approached me, he said he wanted to save people just like Nika, the sun god, did. But the one brilliant thing that he does do here is he starts playing the mind games on her and basically says, like, that ability you got to be able to, do things with the future and not see possible futures, but I'm thinking about Boruto right now, but that ability you have to be able to age yourself up and age yourself into a future version of yourself and change and etc. That gets weaker as you get more and more accustomed to reality. And he's playing the mind games, and as he sees Luffy and Luffy's eating, he says, who gave him food? And my money's on Kizaru. But the other thing is, it's like he's like, put the Sea Prism cuffs on him right now. And it's because he doesn't need Luffy getting around too. And what I like here is that this is where Saturn just continues the nasty work. And he tells her, like, everything from the ability you have, that came from me. And he explains how that power came directly from him. And it's because he wanted to experiment to see if an infant would be capable of eating a solid fruit, could be given the powers with an extract. And then he takes a step further and he says, like, yeah, your mother, yeah, I experimented on her too. And it's kind of funny that what happened to her got passed down to her daughter. And when Vegapunk hears this, Vegapunk gets super pissed off because he's like, wait a second. So you did all this as an experiment. You understand what those sapphire scales did to Kuma's family. And it just makes you, because now that you've gone through that whole flashback, it makes you realize that there could have been a happy ending for Kuma and his wife and for Bonney in an alternate timeline had Saturn not done this. And it just continues that whole theme of what you see in One Piece, where in like the real world, you'd be like, oh my God, the federal government is the best thing ever. In this case, you would think like, oh my God, like the world government, they're really serving the people. But that's not the case of what's going on here. Oda's highlighting that when people have power, it brings out their true nature. And that's what we're seeing here with the elders, in particular with Saturn, and how he doesn't really value human life in the way that somebody like that should. And human lives, when you start playing with them like this, there are real consequences. And we see that with just Bonney in general being basically the last survivor of her family when you really think about it. Because again, her mom's dead, her dad has had his humanity basically shut off. And Vegapunk's like, you did all this, and then you offer Kuma a deal when you're the one that is responsible for all this. And, he's rightfully calling him out. And what I like here is Saturn just doubles down on it. And Saturn's like, put yourself in my shoes. Would you really care about the feelings of an insect? And it just shows you how he feels about just people in general. And what I like here is that as he's getting the reports that Kuma has arrived on Egghead and he's storming forward, you see how Bonney is reverting back to being a child, just like how she was in the beginning of the chapter. However, whereas in the beginning of the chapter, she was physically reverting back to being a child, here she's in her adult form. And yet, when we get access to her internal thoughts, she says, like, I can't, I'm too afraid. She's reverting back to a child mentally. And that's why I call what Kuma did, not Kuma, but Saturn did, to be something that is nasty work, because he's mentally taking a toll on her. And she even talks about how her spirit's breaking down. And just as she starts to begin to give up on living, and she says maybe it'd be better if she would just die, and Saturn throws her onto the ground, looks like he's about to go for the kill and basically grant her that mercy kill. That's where Kuma just shows up. He takes the attack to spare his daughter, and then he turns around right after Bonney has this beautiful panel drawn where she's got the tears in her eyes, you can see the shading, etc. She's screaming out daddy, and Kuma looks like he's about to deck Saturn. And the reason I like this payoff here is because when we get back to the present day, after we get past that flashback, she's told your father's dead. And yet we end the chapter off with her basically being saved by her daughter in the flesh. And it just even gets even further full circle when you look at how Kuma is holding her the same way that a parent would hold a baby. And what we see here, and I guess I shouldn't say like a baby, because like the way that her legs are dangling, but he's still cradling her. And that's what I like about it, is that it just continues to kind of full circle back. And that's one of the things I really enjoy about how Oda does his writing, is that every chapter is almost like a short story that is a part of a longer story. And a good short story will basically circle back to the beginning. And Oda does this with every chapter. If you look at the beginning chapters, there's usually some type of an angle or an anchor or some type of symbolism. And he just loops back to it at the very start. And he loops back to it at the very end. And so I like that right there. And I feel like this is one of the things that really made this chapter, because one of the last images that we have is a Bonney now shrank down in her child form. Full circle, man. This was a beautiful chapter, man. I am so hyped to see where this goes next. But as always, guys, if you like anything I had to say, don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and share. And be on the lookout, because we're going to be doing more regular like discussion videos and everything in the future. But, like for the chapter reviews for a little while, I'm going to continue with the chapter reviews after getting caught up. I'm going to continue with this podcast style blind review type format for the reviews until I can work out something with one of the editors I got on hold. And that way, like, the reviews can get edited in the way that, like, you see, like with the Boruto videos on the Naruto channel. But for the short term, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. But, you know, again, there's going to be some discussion videos coming up really, really soon. So keep notifications turned on because we're about to turn the heat up in 2025 over here on this channel.